In a minute or less, can you make the case that Bobby Fischer was the greatest chess player of all time? Go.
It wouldn't be my pick, but I can definitely make the case.
Yeah.
He probably, at least when chess ratings existed, he had the widest gulf between him and the second best player in the world. So that's a pretty solid case, even though it's not who would be my pick, because the knock against him is his peak was much shorter than Kasparov and Carlsen, who are the other two. Those three are named most often as the possible best players of all time.
Okay. So if you were to make the case for Bobby Fischer, it would be the variance between him, or the gulf or the delta between him and all the other chess players.
Yeah,
he was
at his peak. Yeah.
Ahead of its time.
Yeah.
Okay. You made the case for Bobby Fischer. You know where I'm going next. In a minute or less, can you make the case that Garry Kasparov was the greatest chess player of all time?
For sure. I mean, it was the length of his reign.
Yeah.
I mean, to defend his title so many times against Karpov, who was one of the best players of all time in his own right, but just to find a way to win. And the other thing is I've interviewed people who played him, and he had an intimidation factor that you don't hear about even compared to like Magnus Carlsen.
Right.
He sort of domineering personality. Grandmaster Yasser Seirawan famously described him as being like a caged animal when you played him. You could just sort of feel the life force and the energy. And his opening preparation was leaps and bounds ahead of his competition. He had some sort of institutional advantages because at that time there weren't as many successful chess professionals. So he was able to build a team that would be hard to replicate. Mm-hmm. But it's not hard to make the case for Kasparov as the GOAT.
Okay, 1 minute up. So for Kasparov, it's going to be the longevity in the game, the preparation, and the intimidation factor as well, and the kind of feeling he created in his opponents as well. So you've made the case for Fischer in terms of the delta. For Kasparov, it's the longevity in the game. Final one. 1 minute or less, can you make the case that Magnus Carlsen is the greatest chess player of all time?
Of course, and he comes down somewhere in between. But one thing you have to mention with Magnus that is less clear with Kasparov and Fischer, but might have been true, is now we do know that he's better at all forms of chess. You know, he's been the best bullet player when he bothers to play online, been the best blitz player, won the FIDE World Rapid and Blitz, which was a tournament that didn't exist in Fischer and Kasparov's heyday. He hasn't, in terms of rating golf, he hasn't been quite as dominant as Fischer, but he has been the number one player uninterrupted since 2012 or so. So that's nothing to sneeze at. He didn't have quite the golf, but for the most part, no one has been near him. There was a period where Caruana got within a few points of eclipsing his rating. Funny enough, it was around the time that he beat Caruana in the World Championship. So I think with Carlsen, if he can maintain his number one ranking, it might take a few more years for him to me, Kasparov is number one. Fischer is third because his peak was so short. And Carlsen is, I would say, supplanting Kasparov is well within his sights, but a few more years at the top wouldn't hurt.
So Carlsen's argument would be the versatility that he's shown in the different formats and the universal style of play. But even though he's probably not been in the game as long as Kasparov, and he doesn't have that much of a gulf as Fischer.
Yeah.
Right? And it's interesting because, and you have these in all sports where you can there's always an if. What if Fischer had played longer? He already had that gulf. What if he had been a champion for the next 10, 15 years? It's easy to imagine he would have been because there's such a big difference. But because he didn't, you can't make that case.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.